Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan Bloom, and I will be your host for today's Hart Energy Webinar. Is having too much data a bad thing? Being analytics ready. Now, before we start, we need to review a few housekeeping items to ensure you have an optimal engagement experience during our webinar. You have joined the presentation using your computer speaker system by default. But if you prefer to join over the telephone, just select phone call in the audio pane, then the dial in information will be displayed. Though all attendees are in listen only mode, we do want to hear from you. You can submit your questions to today's presenters by typing them into the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. If the speaker did not address your questions, they will follow up with you and address them individually. And with that, let's get started. In today's webinar, we'll explore the challenges of too much data and how an analytics-ready approach can turn your data overload into a strategic advantage. We are thrilled to have our esteemed speakers with us today. We're joined by Michael Tanner, Managing Director, Sandstone Group, and Casey Harrison, Senior Manager for Solutions Engineering with W Energy. Michael and Casey, the floor is yours.
Let's go over today's agenda, Michael. So first, we're going to talk about the pain points of having too much data. What does that mean to be analytics ready? And then some real world examples that we've seen from some of our customers and shared experiences.
Yeah, no. Well, first off, Casey, thanks for having me. It's really been fun to be able to work alongside you these last couple of years and see what you guys are doing at W Energy, specifically with what we're going to talk about and data view. I mean, I think from my perspective, just to get the cat out of the bag, is having too much data a bad thing? No, absolutely not. Having too much data is a great thing. I think really where the it comes into play is how you're utilizing that data, and that's really what I'm excited to talk about. I think people, automatically just think having a bulk load of data is great. It is. The real question is how are you using it, and are you actually collecting it and organizing it in a manner that's efficient will actually move your organization forward. So I think there's some really interesting stuff to talk about, and just excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. So let's start with everyone's favorite reporting tool, Excel. Is that What are some of the challenges that you've seen people experience when they just start with Excel?
Well, I think for a couple of things. One, Excel is not a database, and so as you move up what I call the data value chain, you start needing more and more aspects of a database that Excel has a hard time handling. One, it maxes you out at a million rows, and if anybody listening in this webinar is in finance or accounting, you'll be like, well, wait a second. For every transaction that goes through my accounting software, there's 4 entries that need to happen on each of the different sub tables and sub ledgers. So all of a sudden now only 250,000 transactions go ahead and errors out my Excel database. Well, I mean that's 2 months worth of work, especially if you're an operated oil and gas company. So very quickly, especially when you're, as I mentioned, in an operated asset, you begin to lose. You're basically capped out, and all of a sudden you're managing multiple database or multiple spreadsheets. And then this gets into the second problem with Excel is the version control aspect, especially with today's, auto save function up at the top. It's great because you make a change and boom, it auto saves. But a lot of the times you need to be able to go back and say, okay, what did it look like 3 weeks ago? What did it look like 6 months ago? And having multiple people access that spreadsheet, a lot of things can get lost in translation. So both from a size and a version control standpoint, you very quickly, especially in the finance and accounting world, kind of lose out on all of the great stuff that Excel has because you're working with so much data and you're now having multiple people access it.
Yeah, one of the things that we see with our customers is that they just max out Excel very quickly. Not even a single month's worth of transactions can fit in Excel anymore, much less a year. So if you're trying to do end of year reporting or something like that, Excel's just not going to work for most oil and gas operators. They will try to parse data, try to put it in multiple spreadsheets, do complicated formulas to bring tables together. It's really just a tool that is very useful. Love Excel, everybody does, but it's not robust enough, I think, for most of our customers.
And I think even whoever, Microsoft, who designed Excel, would tell you that it's great for your smaller analytical size data, but as you get into the bulk data, there's a reason why Microsoft offers their own version of a database. There's a reason why the entire database infrastructure took off in the mid 2000s. Well, that's because people realized, wait a second, there's a lot more, there's a lot more transactions and there's a lot more metadata going on than Excel can hold. And from my perspective, working both inside operators and then now working alongside them, helping them with a lot of these complex problems. I think the other thing, the biggest point, and kind of the point number two that I want to hit on, is that version control, because what everyone wants to know, especially in the era of private equity, especially in the era of the fund model, what did we say we were going to do, and then how did that perform? Everyone talks about the AFE versus actual risk management. Those are big topics, and being able to compare, here's what we said we were going to do with here's what we actually did, and then being able to dive into that and say, okay, where did the disconnect? If we achieved our goal, great, yay, let's learn from that and make sure we keep hitting on those same notes. And if we didn't learn from that, or we didn't necessarily succeed per se in what we said we were going to do versus what we actually did, how can we kind of dive in there and say, okay, what could we have done differently? And a lot of times that's in the data that you already have. And so it's just a matter of making sure you're using it efficiently. So no, having too much data is not the problem. It's making sure it's being used efficiently.
Yeah, this is probably the number one thing that I hear from our customers and from the market is that we have all this data. How do we use it to make good decisions? How do we use it to learn from what we've done in the past? How do we do it to allocate our resources in the future? This data has been captured for years and years and years. Now we're being asked to actually use that data to make decisions and inform the executive team, inform the finance team, inform everyone who plays a role, who's a stakeholder in using this data. And I think that versioning control, but also just having a complete picture of your entire business. So the versioning control, but also being able to see previously siloed departments or siloed areas of operations, or you've got the field in one area, you've got the back office in another city. How are these two places communicating with each other? They're all collecting data, they're all working towards the same goal. Are they all truly rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, there's a story when you talk about that comes to mind that I think is really critical, in the fact of kind of the idea of, okay, if we're actually doing AFE versus actual, budgets versus actual, predictions versus actual, well, how does that manifest itself? So I was one of the previous companies I was working at, was kind of the fund style model: go raise institutional capital and then go deploy that in a bunch of different operated assets. At least that was the original plan, was, hey, we're going to go drill a bunch of operated assets. As they began to roll out that portfolio, what they realized is that the small amount of non-operated assets that they had in their portfolio were actually wildly outperforming their operated assets. And as the overall dynamics of the industry shifted back in the early 2020s, it being able to capture and see that in real time actually allowed them to shift their model a little bit, move much more heavily into the non-operated side. And actually it was a huge boon both for them and their underlying investors, which again is the critical part about all of this. I mean, everyone's sitting in an oil and gas company. You've got investors, you've got a board, you've got other stakeholders that care about the fiscal performance of your company. And if you're not able to pivot in real time based upon new data that's coming in every single day, whether it's reservoir data, whether it's financial data, all of the sorts, if you're not able to make sure all of that and organize that all tremendously, you're going to end up with a business model that may not necessarily fit the current climate of it. So to me, that stands out as a huge, huge story in my mind when I think about, okay, how do you actually use this data to make decisions? Well, you can use this decision to completely switch operating models after seeing, hey, wait a second, we're actually seeing something better within our portfolio. And it's a small segment. I think that's the part that I want to hone in on. It wasn't like the non-operated part of the portfolio was 50%. It was maybe a 15-20% allocation. And a lot of times that would get overlooked because, again, the bulk of the spend and a bulk of the time and the effort is going into the operated assets, when if you're having to spend, if you're having to spend, weeks and days or have it, just to organize and get a grip on what's actually going on, you might miss that 20%. Hey, that's where the gold is.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting story, and I really liked what you said about being able to make decisions faster, and being able to pivot quickly. So previously, if that, that data would have been available, but it might have taken you 6 weeks, 8 weeks to figure out, oh, we actually need to be able to, we need to deploy more capital into the non-operated assets. When in reality, with something like data view, you can see that data much faster and start making those decisions quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm excited to talk a little bit about data view in a second, but just to kind of bring in to talk to what you talk about, what data view solves is the classic problem of someone who's in data. Let's just take a traditional data analyst. They spend 80% of their time organizing and cleaning the data, and only 20% of the time actually analyzing that data, when in reality it needs to be flipped. And if it's not flipped, if you're spending 80% of your time analyzing data and or building the data set, cleaning it, making sure it's analytics ready, as we're talking about, 20% of your time analyzing, you're going to completely miss out on the opportunity to, again, shift your portfolio, whether it's to operated to non-operated, whether it's, change the capital, reallocate the capital spend within your portfolio from, the Bakken down to the Permian. You're seeing a lot of that happen at these larger operators right now. They're kind of reshifting exactly where all their capital is going. And the reason why they're able to do that so quickly is because they're spending, they've been able to develop solutions like DataView that are able to take that 80%, bring it down to 20, and then now their team has 80% of their time to actually analyze and do their job, which I think is the funny part. A lot of times we talk about, oh, well, I spent all this time building this database. It's like, well, is that actually in your job description? I was in finance. It wasn't my job to have to build all these robust reporting solutions, but sometimes the job necessitates that we do things that are outside of our job description so that we can actually do our job. The problem is now I'm lowering my bandwidth, and unless I want to go to night school or work 14, 15 hours a day, well, then something's going to have to give one way there. So what DataView does, in my opinion, is really give people their time back to be able to focus on their job, which a lot of it is actually analyzing data.
Right. And those connections between the tables. So to kind of explain what that means, previously, if you had some sort of connection to a database, the connections between the tables wouldn't exist. So users, whoever was consuming that data, would have to spend a large amount of their time actually making sure that those are correct, which oftentimes they weren't. And then only 20% of their time was able to be spent on the actual analysis of the data. And so we're just delaying those the decision making time. We're delaying the time that executives get the data and see dashboards. With a tool like DataView, it's all ready to go. So it's out of the box. Any user can use it. You do not have to be a technical person to be able to use it. One of my favorite things about it, when we deploy this at some of our customers, they can get in there and start building things that they had previously only, thought, oh, this would be great to be able to see this data. And they can start building it and look at reports pretty much immediately.
I think the beautiful thing, and to piggyback off what you said, another kind of anecdotal story that I have is, I was able to jump on a Zoom call. So you can imagine, even being in office with somebody, sometimes when you're talking, from a technical to a non-technical person, a lot of stuff gets lost in translation. But DataView is so easy for a non-technical user to actually access it. I was able to get on a Zoom with somebody who would no doubt call themselves a non-technical person. I was able to get them logged into DataView using their BI tool of choice. That's the other interesting part to note. It's BI tool agnostic. So whether you're a Spotfire user, whether you like Power BI, or whether some people like Tableau. I mean, there's a bunch of different BI tools out there, but using your BI tool of choice we were able to build via Zoom. I was able to walk this person through how to build exactly the GL slicer that they needed to be able to drill down and to look at the individual accounts that they were looking for within 5 minutes. Whereas one, that underlying data set's more than 1,000,000 rows. So even if that person wanted and knew how to get that data out of the accounting system and into Excel, they were going to run into a huge problem of, well, it's more than 1,000,000 rows. The BI tool allows us to expand that into more than 1,000,000 rows, and it allows us to build a reusable dashboard that now can be referenced multiple times. So I think that's another critical point to DataView is the speed at which non-technical users can go from basically bypass the entire learning process and just go straight to the end. I mean, the sexy term right now is medallion architecture. People talk about you've got all this unstructured data, all your financial data, the millions and millions of tables and rows that are unassociated. You've got division orders, you've got all the, not just the division orders, but your DO lines of interest. You've got AFEs, you've got budgets, you've got your GL tables, you've got all of these different tables that all interconnect with each other, cost centers, business associates that layer in to all of these tables, because it doesn't make sense just to know how much did we spend. You want to know exactly where you're spending this money, which comes down to both the cost centers and who are we spending this money with, aka your business associates. So all of this stuff is intertwined. That's all living in separate tables. So talking about taking, your traditional medallion architecture would say, okay, that's your bronze level where you have all this unstructured data kind of sitting out there, just kind of not in the ether, but really unorganized. And to actually take that and to produce something that's valuable, it takes a lot of time. Then you move to what's called the silver level, where usually somebody who's very skilled at data takes those unorganized tables and organizes them in a way that's much more efficient, that can be handled by a different database tool, that makes it easier to understand, that kind of combines the stuff you need. And then you move that into what's called the gold level, which is what, as we talk about on this call, the analytics ready database, which is basically, this is organized, cleaned, and linked in a way that makes it extremely simple for that non-technical person to be able to build the reports you want. The beautiful part about DataView is it does the bronze and silver layer work for you, and it brings you straight to the gold level, which is that analytics ready database, which is why you're able to take such a non-technical user and bring them all the way basically through that architecture into the end stage. Because again, the large companies, your super majors, they may have time to have huge teams to be able to go from bronze to silver to gold. But if you're at a mid to, specifically if you're at a medium, to smallish operator, you're wearing multiple hats. You don't necessarily have the time to do all that, nor do you have the resources to do that. So it's one of the things I really like about DataView is that it basically wipes out the need to basically even have a large, robust data team, because the hard work is done for you.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that we hear when we go into our customers' offices and when we talk to them about what they're experiencing, before DataView and then after DataView, it really solves a lot of their challenges for them, because it gives everybody access to the data that they're capturing, and then they can make those decisions that we've been talking about. But really, I want to kind of hone in on the executives here for a minute, because they're not typically going to be in the database day to day. They're not making entries typically, but they do want to be able to see the information that's being captured, and not just in some canned stand reports that somebody somewhere decided that they would want to see. What DataView gives them the ability to do is see a a a dashboard that they can drill down into, that they can actually get to the source data, that they can see a complete picture of their entire business. So the field operations, the accounting operations, AFEs, budgets, all of those tables, they're able to see the complete picture of their business in a way that had previously only been available to those super majors that we talked about, that had all the resources, that had a whole data team, that had, a whole department whose whole job was to connect these systems. With DataView, it's just already here, ready to go for any operator who wants it.
Yeah, and I think it's a really great point, because how the production of a single well in your portfolio, how does that affect the underlying profitability of your company, is is really critical. I mean, one well in a 100 well portfolio, let's say, is really critical. One well in a 10,000 well portfolio may not be as critical, but the story it tells in relation to how the underlying profitability of the portfolio is going is critical. So just because you can't necessarily tie a single well directly to the underlying profitability doesn't mean that it can't inform a story about how your assets are going. And to kind of to touch on your executive point a little bit, I've been in the role where I was basically building corporate reporting, and that's a fun job because you kind of get to be that last layer between what's going on kind of what's kind of going on at the field level and the engineering level, and get to be the one that helps translate that and really get to communicate directly with the executives. But having been in that role, the first question you always get when you get done putting together a report is, well, what happens if this changed? And it was the dreaded question. Sometimes we'd be at I was in a 9-story building, so I just want to open up the window and just jump out because it's like, I just spent 3 hours now building this report only for you to come out of left field, rightfully so, and think, well, wait a second, what if we changed this, and what if we tweaked this input? What if we went ahead and actually added, these 4 more assets? Or what if we looked at this group of assets in isolation? And, they're generally great thoughts. The problem is traditional reporting is generally fairly static. The beautiful part about DataView is it's tapping in directly to the underlying data source. So those type of questions can be easily answered. You can now sit there and say, oh, here, boom, boom, boom. Now the report has changed. It's still referencing your source data, and it really allows you to be a lot more flexible and answer those questions in real time. Because there's nothing, from the chair I used to sit in, there's nothing more there's nothing more deflating than 5 minutes into the meeting, the executives have kind of completely shifted where their mind's at. Because if you build a report right, you should be able to understand the answer quickly. Like if you have to sit there and really think about, I wonder what's going on here, well, your report probably isn't clear enough. So the upside to a clear report is that it takes a couple minutes to analyze. The problem is the next question is always, well, okay, what if we did this? And if you can't handle, okay, well, then what happens next? That's when you get into a situation of, okay, well, now you're just spending all of this time iterating when that hopefully should be able to be done in real time. To go back to the operator versus non-operator story I brought up, that's how that stuff was able to flow in real time, because you're able to actually get a meeting of the minds, sit in there and be able to manipulate all of these different quote unquote reports or dashboards. I know that word everybody loves that word now, but at the underlying, it's really just a report that says, okay, this is one snapshot of where we are. And I think that's the other thing that, from my perspective, I think a lot of people miss is a lot of people say, okay, I'm going to give you a report. Well, a report is just one view of one set of assumptions at one time frame of what we think is going to happen. When in reality, there are thousands of different assumptions that could be changed. There are 1,000 different time points that we want to actually reference this. You don't just want to take a reserve report today. You want to look at a reserve report tomorrow. You don't want to look at your balance sheet at the end of this year. You want to try to predict what's your balance sheet at the end of 2025 if we do all these things. And so really what you want to do is build a conglomerate of scenarios that allows you to, almost like a dart on a dartboard. You just throw one dart and hit a dartboard. It doesn't really tell you anything. It says, okay, great, this one time we hit there. But if I throw 1,000 darts, now I can start looking at where all of those darts start honing in on, and I can start to get an idea of, okay, if we run this simulation 1,000 times, what is the average position we end up at? And the beauty about DataView is it allows you to do that because it's always connected back into the most current updated data, and not just a snapshot of that database at whatever point. Going back to our Excel story, if you're having to load in new data every single day, one, you're going to run out of data, but two, that's a huge time. So three, most people don't do that. They just take a snapshot of their database, their financial outlook at one point, and then keep reference back. Well, the problem is new things are happening every single day. So being able to be flexible and make sure that, hey, the what if question or how about this, you can always answer.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. We've talked a good bit about the problems that DataView solves. Let's take a look at a report that we've built using, or a dashboard that we've built using DataView. So here's an example of a report that was built using DataView. You can see it's a dashboard, which is basically a report with visuals. But what this gives you the ability to do, you can see all of the reports that are available to any particular user, but then you can also drill down into the data. And those slices that Michael was talking about, the ability to change things, the what if this happens, all of those items are so easy to bring in and start manipulating your data. You can bring in external data sources. So we're seeing a lot of M&A activity. Everybody knows that. You can bring in a potential acquisition, or you can look to see what a potential sale might look like, how that's going to affect your operations and your business. Any type of scenario that you can really think of, if the data's there, you can visualize it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this is a beautiful, beautiful example of how to answer the what if question. What if we sold off this asset? What does the portfolio look like? What if we decided to drill 3 more of these wells? And, or what you can see is, oh, wow, what happened in this month? And then you can say, okay, well, why did we make so much revenue this month? Oh, well, it's because it's because differentials were up, or, oh, it's because we had a pricing, or we brought 3 wells online. All of those questions can be answered in real time. And really, again, what DataView allows you to do is think differently, and really be able to think differently about your portfolio. Everybody loves the standard LOS statement, but what if you want to look at your LOS by vendor? I mean, that was one of the first, that was a question I got, working at one of my previous companies, where I never really had thought of that. I was like, interesting, LOS by vendor. And then the more you think about it, well, that's true. If you're a 60 well development plan and you've got 7 key vendors that you're using, you actually might want to actually look at you might want to break down how much you're spending per vendor on an individual stuff, and compare that over time, compare that to the individual wells, and do a bunch of interesting things that you may not off the top of your head be like, oh, I don't even know if you can do that. Well, the answer is, with DataView, you can do that, and you can answer all of the questions, because at the end of the day, the executives, they may not know the underlying databases, but they know what drives the profitability of the company, and they understand and they know what they want. So being able to answer the question of what they want is critical. And it's the beautiful part, and at the end of the day, everybody loves a good dashboard from the standpoint of they look clean, you're able to change them, and it provides an ease of use and a repeatability, so that you can actually scale this beyond, just whatever your current, kind of base assets look like.
All right,
Sure.
I think it's time to move on to Q&A. Do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Michael and Casey. Yes, as you mentioned, now it is time for the Q&A portion of the webinar. So we will open the floor for questions. You can submit your questions by typing them into the questions pane in the control panel. Now we have first question coming up. Just to follow up on what has been discussed so far, how can this help in corporate reporting?
I'll take
Yeah.
this one.
Okay.
It really allows you to answer, again, going back to what I talked about earlier, the what if question. Okay, you're sitting in a meeting with the executives. You're going to go show them a report. You spend hours working on the report. It's concise. It shows exactly what they're looking for. The charts are easy to understand. The story is great. Well, that first question you're going to get is, well, okay, well, what if we change this then? Well, what if we decided to sell off this portion of the portfolio? What does the balance sheet look like? Or how does this change our enterprise value? And now you're sitting there with the static report, and you're like, okay, I got to go back into the cave and spend the next 3 days doing it. Well, that's not what executives want to hear. They want to be able to see in real time they want to be able to see in real time how this affects. And again, taking that dartboard example, be able to not just throw one dart, be able to throw 100 darts and be like, okay, well, the majority of them are landing here. So we have a pretty good probability that if we do one of these things, it's going to land right here. And so that's really how it affects what you do in a corporate reporting. It allows you to move quickly, and it really allows you to not focus on the reporting so much as it allows you to focus on the analysis of that report, because that's really where the money's made. It's not made in building the report. If it was, everyone would spend all their time making fancy dashboards. We all love a good fancy dashboard, but really what that fancy dashboard allows us to do is it allows us to make better decisions. And it all comes back to decisions, because better decisions means better profitability. And that's really better for all stakeholders.
Yeah, and I want to say, as far as DataView goes, we are not starting at a blank canvas in terms of corporate reporting. You're going to get standard reports, you're going to get core reports. So you don't have to start, like I said, from a blank canvas. You can start from a pre-existing dashboard, a pre-existing report, and then make those what if changes, and then start making the profitability decision. So it's not overwhelming. It's not and it's not too much.
Very good. Thank you so much. Moving to the next question. If you're a startup, can we get by with just using Excel and other applications? Basically, can the piecemeal approach work?
Yeah, so this is I'll take this one first. I mean, you can weigh in, Michael. This is a question that I get asked a lot when I'm talking to the market or smaller customers who maybe don't have any assets yet. Maybe they've raised some capital, they're going to start buying assets, or maybe they have a few assets. Um, can we just get by with Excel? Well, yeah, sort of is my answer. But eventually, if your goal is to grow, you're going to have to convert that data anyway. You might as well start in a clean system that you can use and that will grow with you, that'll scale up or down, whether or not you decide to grow or contract. So that's my answer, is that, if you know that you've got plans for growth, or if you know you have plans for change, you might as well future proof your business while it's easy.
Yeah, I would just follow up with kind of that last half of that answer. It's just, if you have any plans on scaling, which I think any entrepreneur who gets into the business is like, yeah, we want to scale, we want to go from where we are, we want to go all the way here. Well, great. Well, you should then make decisions as if you're here and not here, because by the time you get to where you want to be, it usually is too late. And, we've all, we've all been a part of, you know, processes and migrations where it's like, man, if we had just done this 2 years ago, we would be in a much better spot. Well, guess what? If you're a startup, you have the opportunity to make those decisions day one. And things at specifically in oil and gas always scale exponentially. So it's not just like, hey, we've only got 20 wells. If we move to 40 wells, it's not just a double. Sometimes there's no one-to-one relationship relative, especially if you're operating assets. If you're operating assets, man, you can only have 20 wells, but if you're drilling 20 new horizontal wells, man, you need to, that is a lot different than if you're just acquiring 400 legacy stripper wells. So I think it's definitely a matter of kind of taking stock where you're at, seeing where you want to go, and really optimizing for where you want to go, because it's going to be a whole lot easier to manage when you're there versus then you're trying to kind of play catch up.
Great. I don't think anyone really likes Excel anyway. Getting to our next question, how do I make a business case to management that this is even an issue? Management only sees the bottom line, but not necessarily the inefficient, time-consuming data gathering and massaging that goes into everything. So how do you get that executive buy-in?
It's a really good question, and it's probably the hardest part about this entire process is, okay, like, we know that you're spending 80% of your time building the reports and not analyzing them. We know that you understand kind of the back end logistics of where all this data is, how it's flowing. But at the end of the day, what your manager sees or executives see is the final report, and they don't necessarily see the process that goes into it. So I think when you're talking about getting executive buy-in, I think it's, as much as you don't want to be educating your bosses, but you do at the same point. You need to educate them on, here's actually what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, I remember, when I was trying to get, anytime I would try to get a solution pitch to management, the first thing I would start out with is a memo. And I know people go, I don't have time to write a memo. Well, you have to start somewhere. So I would usually start with, a memo, which basically outlines, here's the current process, here's where the inefficiencies are. And in terms of inefficiencies, I would hone in on time. Because if you start and really layer out and explain, hey, I'm spending 15 hours a week on just gathering and organizing data, managers will see that and be like, well, wait a second, we don't even pay you to do that. Wait, you're spending 15 to 20 hours a week. You're almost spending half of your time in the office. If you're on a standard 40-hour work week, you're spending half of your time organizing data. well, wait a second, if I was able to give you 15 hours a week, think about the level of analysis you could do with that. So focusing in on how much time it's taking you, I think is critical. And then I think it's, as painful as this sounds, it's being slow with them. I mean, you're not just going to write a memo, even if it's the best memo in the world. It's not going to produce change right away. I think you have to be slow. There's an education process. You have to almost meet management where they're at, understand what their needs are. I think, again, what do they care about? They care about making profitable decisions. And so if you can tie how much time you're spending directly into helping make better profitable decisions, it's a much easier gap to show. I mean, being able to show, hey, if we were able to make decisions, going back to the operated versus non-operated story, if we're able to find that type of story where, hey, we built this report, we actually found this inefficiency, we made the recommendation, you actually followed the recommendation, and there was this positive financial outcome. Being able to go back and say, well, if we had actually made that decision quicker, we could have, instead of just making that decision on this asset, we could have made it on all of these assets. But because of the time it took to actually develop that solution, we lost out on an opportunity to do it at a bigger scale. They'll recognize that right away. So I think it's focusing on how much time you're spending, and really not spending, I would say wasting, on organizing and cleaning all of this data to directly exactly what's going on kind of at the the portfolio optimization, or portfolio, what I would say, financial health. Because again, tying it to how the company is doing is critical. But it's a great question. Management buy-in is really tough, especially when you're talking with people who aren't necessarily technical. It's why I recommend not focusing on the technical requirements. This is a mistake I've made in my career. I'm going to go walk in and just show them all this fancy text that they don't care. Most of the time it's over their head. A lot of the stuff is over my head even. So it's developing a story that actually focuses on what executives care about, which is time, good analysis, which ultimately leads to better decisions and more profitable decisions. I don't know, Casey, you talk with executives all the time as well from your end, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say on this one.
Yeah, so I think definitely steer clear of the technical conversations. I agree with that. But tying it back to value. So look at a past decision that was made. Would we have been able to make that decision 60 days faster? Would we have been able to deploy a rig in a more profitable zone? Would we have, what decision could we have made differently in the past that will affect our future? And then what is the value of that decision, and does it outweigh the cost? So that's really what it comes down to, for most executives, solving a problem for them. Another problem that we see that executives care a lot about, their operations are in a completely different area than their home offices. They're in Houston, but their wells are in West Texas or North Dakota or Oklahoma or wherever that may be. Getting information from the field to the office quickly, so you can deploy resources, deploy assets, and make sure that those wells stay up and online and active, and ultimately making money.
Thank you very much.
It's a great question though, and it's easier said than done. But no, I really like what Casey said there.
Great. Well, we're getting a little short on time, so are there any closing thoughts we want to highlight?
Thanks for joining today. Thanks for listening to our talk about having too much data, the problems that we have, and the ways that we're solving that, and what we're seeing in the industry. If you'd like to reach out to either of us, our contact information is available, and we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Great. Really appreciate the W Energy team, and Casey, you have me on, and it's a very important conversation. I'm just excited to be part of it.
Very good. Now, if we didn't get to your questions, or should you have any additional questions, like was mentioned, the speakers will follow up with you individually. Thank you all again for joining us with today's Hart Energy webinar featuring W Energy. I really enjoyed our discussion and learned a lot today, and I hope you did too. If you would like to rewatch this webinar, an email with a link to watch it on demand will be shared with you once it's available. Thank you and have a great day.